the first thing I wanted to know is what inspired you to write the Look Uglies? Did you have any readers in mind when you wrote it, or was it more for yourself? Or
I actually had two or three, I suppose, very specific readers, and those were my two daughters and my wife. So this was very much a family effort, I suppose you'd call it, or a labor of love. I'd been writing my whole life, and about 10 years ago, I was writing men's contemporary adult crime fiction, sort of mysteries, thriller type books, and I had an agent I was represented, and we were submitted to every major publisher in New York, and they had all sorts of great things to say about it. But ultimately, they all said no, and they all passed. So I never had any thought about writing for children. But after that, I've been trying to write for adults. I got married, and I had two daughters, and it occurred to me. I also had a full-time career as a lawyer that kept me away from far more often than I would like. And it occurred to me that it was a very sort of selfish. Writing can be a very selfish activity. It's very hard to be gone and away from home at some other job, and then come home and then spend more time locked away in the laptop. So one day, about 4 years ago now, we were heading into the Christmas holidays, and my daughter, who was 6 at the time, said, as a present, she said, "Could you write me a story?" And I said, "Yeah, I can do that. I can write a story." And I started writing what was intended to be just to be a short story, sort of a fantastical and a fantasy type story for her. And we sat around the fire on Christmas Eve, just the four of us. And I read ultimately it would become the first 4 chapters of the Look Uglies, and so I read them, and they said, "Wow, this is great. What happens next?" And I said, "I don't know." And they said, "Well, get to work. You get back to writing." And it turned out to be something I really wrote it very, in the grand scheme of things, relatively quickly for me. I wrote a chapter every week, and so it took the filter off. I wasn't worried about writing for publication or to get an agent or anything like that. I really just wrote it for them. And because I wasn't so, I think, hyper aware and so self-conscious of what was going to be in it, it really just sort of opened up, and I could let my imagination run. And lo and behold, and after about 3 or 4 months, I had this completed book that became the Look Uglies. So it's a long answer to a short question. But I had really, I would say 3 very specific readers' mine. Those were the 3 women in my wife, and my 2 daughters.
Brilliant. And in terms of them, what's their feedback been so far? Have they enjoyed it now it's out?
Oh yeah, they're absolutely thrilled. I mean, like I said, they're very invested in the process because the characters in the book, like all authors, they're not literally based. They're not exactly like the real people in our lives, but they're very similar. They see a lot of similarities in themselves, and just the fact that they had read this book long before it was published. Yeah. I mean, there was all the build up in the publishing process. When the book came out last spring here in the States, and so I'm not one to have a big launch party or something like that. So I went to my daughter's school, and I just sort of had a party with them. I did I did a presentation to the school, and I went to her classroom, and so it was just really fun. And they absolutely, sometimes, I'm working, it's a series, so I've just, finished the second book, and they love the fact that they got to read it and see how it evolved. And now I get the demand every day of, how's book 3 coming? When are we going to get to read it? When are we going to get to read the next few chapters? So they've been terrific, and I find that, sometimes when I hit a wall, or when I find myself, being critical and worrying about how something might be received, I just sort of try to step back and remember who I'm writing it for, and that kind of grounds me and keeps me focused on what I'm doing.
Brilliant. And in terms of your characters as well, I mean, it's a tricky question to ask, but have you got a favourite character? And also, did any of them kind of come to you more easily than others as well?
Yeah, it is tricky because I write them all, so I obviously I always have a soft spot for all of them, and I do love them all. Some are more fun to write than others. I mean, obviously, Rye, who's the main protagonist, who's an 11-year-old girl. Reminds me very much of my daughter, who is about it. So I enjoy writing her quite a bit, and I really do adore that character. I think probably my favorite character to write is Harmless, who, without giving too much away, is sort of plays a major role in the book, and for a lot of reasons, there's a lot of in my book. One of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to explore family dynamics. A lot of fantasy books, for many different reasons throughout literature, focus on orphans. Orphans play such a key role in so many children's books, and I really wanted to get into explore some of the issues that arise with families. And so, the relationships that evolve between Harmless and Abby and Rye and the other sort of closely knit group in the book, for me, I think is the most fun to write. I'm certainly not. I think sometimes it would be great if we could all be these great sort of swashbuckling characters. So I'm certainly not like that. Some of the challenges that parents face in the book, even though it's a fantasy, I think they're grounded, and I try to ground them based in reality.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one thing I noticed as well is a lot of kind of fantasy books have an older kind of paternal figure, like Gandalf and Dumbledore. And I wondered whether you think that Harmless is that type of character, or whether he's kind of someone else, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a touch of that. I mean, he brings a certain amount of wisdom with him, but I don't think he's quite. I don't think he's quite as evolved as some of the sort of the wizened wizards of literature. I mean, he certainly has his flaws, and he has a lot of he's like, I think, many 40-year-old men. They've reached some degree that I know that they've reached some degree of accomplishment in their career or whatever it may be, but there are still challenges in their lives, and there in the book there's things that he learns from Rye, and he comes to appreciate things, see things with new eyes. So he's not sort of this. He certainly is a paternalistic figure and has that. There's a certain weight and gravitas behind him when he in his dealings with the world and how he arrives. But at the same time, he's very flawed, and there's a few lines in the book where it's very clear that not everybody's afraid of Harmless. Abby being one of the particular people who is not afraid of them. Abby being his mother, and so I think he's a little different in that he's not. He's not absolute, right? I mean, he doesn't have his wisdom and his knowledge is not absolute. He's very much flawed, and in many ways, as much as he's heroic, there are also things about him that Rye and other characters see as are worth exploring, giving a second look to.
Yeah, definitely. And a question I wanted to ask you actually. Basically, if you lived in the world of the Uglies, what do you think you'd do for a living?
That's a great question.
Tricky one to answer.
Yeah, it's a real tricky one to answer. What would I do for a living? Maybe I would be Tam. Tam's Tome is sort of the band book in Village Drowning. So I'd like to think maybe I was one of the writers of the time. That might be where I fit in best. I don't think I would be a Lucker. And I don't think I would. And I don't think I would be somebody who sort of work under the thumb of the Earl. I'd probably still want to be a writer. I might try to find my little niche being a writer somewhere. Yeah.
Cool. And one question we ask everybody is, what was the last book you read, and what did you think of it?
Oh, that's okay. Another great question. The book I read just now just finished was one of the few departures from middle grade fiction I've read lately, and that was American Gods by Neil Gaiman. Which was terrific, and again, like every now and then I like to take a break from reading children's fiction, which I spend most of my time reading. But Neil Gaiman's a favorite of mine anyway. I mean, I love the Graveyard Book and Coraline, and I love all of his work really. But I'd never gone back and actually read American Gods. So I just finished that, and it was it was great. It was terrific, and I enjoyed it a lot.
I've got that on my to be read pile at the moment, but I've read some of his other work and some of the stuff he did with Terry Pratchett as well. But I heard they're going to make a film out of it soon, I think, aren't they?
Yeah, I think I've heard that at different times, and hopefully they do, and I'm just a big fan. I think I've said this other places, but every now and then I like to take a step back and I read when I'm not writing, I read, and Neil Gaiman is one of those authors that every time I read his work, he makes me want to go back and sit at my desk and be a better author.
Yeah.
And that's, I kind of strive to find books and work that make me feel that way. And I just love how he, his books, again, the Graveyard Book is probably my contemporary favorite book of either children or being an older adult, whatever you want to call it. It's one of those books it's very hard to characterize because it's really for everyone. It's so great and so terrific.
And I guess mentioning Neil Gaiman as well, were there any particular writers which inspired you, or any fictional worlds that you sort of drew upon to create your own?
Yeah, when I growing up, it's when I was a kid, and I read a lot when I was young. One of the ones that always stuck with me was, I don't know if you're familiar with Lloyd Alexander and the Chronicles of Pre. Okay, Lloyd Alexander wrote a series of books called the Chronicles of Predane, and they were loosely based on Welsh mythology, and they were they're classics to a certain degree. They're in the state one of the books in the series, one of the Newbery, and another one was a Newbery Honor book. But it's that was the one that always stuck with me as a kid, and it wasn't quite as it was fantasy, but it wasn't quite as epic in scope as things like the Lord of the Rings or Narnia. It had a bit of a more intimate feel to it. The world was a little bit smaller. It was still it was still these heroic quests and journeys, but everything felt more tight knit in nearby, and I just liked the feel of it. I liked there was something about it that just stuck with me, and then I reread it again a couple of times as an adult, and there was something that was just very magical about it. So when I created Village Drowning, it's really there's a lot of Village Drowning. There's a medieval feel to it. There's a certain European feel to it. There's certain elements that are even, at least when I was writing it, even felt a little bit colonial American about it. It was really just this mismatch. I wanted it to be, I wanted it to have obviously no real world setting or real world time, but I wanted it to feel a little bit familiar of a certain time or place. And I didn't want it to be this huge, sprawling, epic, world that was just way too far flung. I wanted to keep it, to tell a story that was big and grand, but keep it in an intimate setting. That's what I hopefully accomplished. So that was, like I said, if anyone asked me, there's so many great books out there. If anyone asked me which ones really stuck with me as a kid or sort of influenced me, I always mention the Chronicles of Predane by Lloyd Alexander.
One last question as well, just to end on as well. I wondered if is there anything that you can tell us about what's sort of coming up in the next books in the series?
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, the next book is called it'll have a couple different. Here in the States, it's called the Luck Uglies Fork Tongue Charmers. There'll be a different title in the UK. And in fact, I should tell you what that is. It slips my mind at the moment, just because we've been tinkering with it. Yeah. I'll look it up. But that takes us to that is a continuation of the story. The characters that you'll be familiar with if you've read the first book, as well as some new characters. It takes place about 5 6 months after the end of the first book, and it talks about sort of, the first book was very much about, will Uglies come back and will they save the village and these different things. And the second book really deals with the consequences of what happens in the first one.
Okay.
The question of, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
And it also, it does a good part of it takes place somewhere else. The Isle of Pest, which is where Rye's mother Abby is from.
Yeah.
So you do get to see it does expand. I just talked about how keeping the world intimate, but it does expand it a little bit. So there's a new place, a new flavor of things. And then so that's pretty much in the can. I mean, we've finished copy editing it. It's in production now. And I'm writing the third book now. Not as we speak, but presently.